Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries, and this is a video response to your Humble Gamesmaster's video, OSR Gatekeepers, I Do Not Fear Death. Okay, so in his video, the Humble Gamesmaster is talking, amongst other things, about the funnel style of play and the whole zero to hero conceit. Now, I'm not a massive fan of the funnel style play, and for those of you who don't know, the idea of a funnel is you start off with loads of effectively quite shitty low-level characters, and most of them die, and some more of them die, and some more of them die, and some more of them die, until you've got maybe half a dozen, if you're lucky, that progress to be other than sort of fairly low-level heroes. Now, I don't mind this. I have no problems with characters dying. I'm sure anyone who's played in Fate games with me will probably remark on the fact that I tend to die an awful lot in games. And to be honest, I'm okay with that. I think any sort of role-playing game involves an inherent degree of risk to a character. I mean, most games have extensive rules for dealing with combat, and any sort of combat or fighting, not to mention war, is an inherently risky business, and death is one of the consequences of that sort of activity. Not to mention traps, dungeon exploring, various other things that can go on in an RPG. And let's face it, there's all manner of crazy different scenarios that come up in RPGs. Now, as the Humble Gamesmaster was saying, I've also got no problems with characters dying, but I do like to have at least a little bit of time to actually develop my characters. I've got to admit, if I was playing in a game and sort of every 5 minutes it was a case of, oh, my character's died, I best gen another one. Oh, that character's died, I best gen another one. Then I've got to admit, after a little bit, I probably wouldn't be putting in as much effort to actually developing my character, which I think, from my point of view, would be a little bit of a shame, since that's one of the things I really enjoy about a game, sort of trying to get under the skin of a character, having a chance to develop them, having a chance to interact as them with other people, building up party relationships, etc. Now, I appreciate that not everyone loves that particular part of the game, and if you don't, that's fine, crack on. However, for me, I think if I was having to create a new character every 5 minutes, I would start to lose interest and not put as much investment into future characters. Now, I can see in the comments of the Humble Gamesmaster's video that one of the commenters has said that part of the reason they're not interested in OSR is because the view of life being cheap is an intrinsically male point of view. Now, as someone who is male, I'm not sure if you noticed, I can't really comment on that because, to be honest, I can only really say things from my particular point of view. I don't have a hotline to the entire male populace's viewpoint, and certainly not to the female populace's viewpoint. But I think I would say, at a conservative estimate, 99% of role-playing games, there is an element of risk with the potential. So the potential that death may occur as a result of that risk. Now, is that an intrinsically male thing? I honestly don't know, but I certainly think it's intrinsically a part of RPGs and the sort of mythic tales, the war games, etc. All the stuff that spawned RPGs. I think death is always a large part of that. And as the Humble Gamesmaster says, you've only got to look at like Lord of the Rings or mythology or any of the classic sources that led on to RPGs to see that death is a huge part of them, in the same way that death is a huge part of life. I mean, look at some of the ancient civilizations like the ancient Egyptians, where their pharaohs spent a great deal of their life preparing for death and what they believed came afterwards. Now, if you look at role-playing games, death is always a part of them, as it's a part of life. And I just think that's the way it is. And okay, in OSR games, death might be a little bit more common than it is in storytelling games, since their OSR games are closer to the original style of D&D, which was potentially a little more deadly than some modern games, and focused a little bit more on combat and circumstances that would lead to death. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, it's just a different style of gaming. As for the idea that throwing your life away is a fantasy of men who will never get a girlfriend and thus can throw their lives away, not entirely sure that's the case, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I can only speak for myself again, but I've been married for over 10 years, and yet if I'm playing in a role-playing game and I'm playing a character who is in a situation where it's necessary and justified that they would sacrifice their life and it works for that character, that is what I would do. Because for me, I know I've bantered on about hating the phrase, it's what my character would do to justify disruptive behaviour, but if I'm in a situation where I think my character would sacrifice his life for another, or would sacrifice his life to help other people in some way, and that's what the character would do, then that's what I'll do in the game. And I would hope if I was in real life and I had the opportunity where I was potentially putting myself in harm's way to help someone else out, I would hope that I would at least consider doing that. And I would hope that other people would too. So in conclusion, I very much enjoyed the Humble Gamesmaster's video. I know this has turned into a bit of a ramble more than an actual video response, but in conclusion, I think that the sort of funnel style of play, whilst it isn't really for me, it is sort of baked into at least some OSR games, although as some of the commenters pointed out, you're quite within your rights to take OSR games and make them what you want, in the same way you are storytelling games. I also think that one of the main differences is OSR games oddly have a sort of similar thing going on to storytelling games, because they both tend to have fairly simple rules and encourage people to look beyond those rules and look more towards the role-playing. In storytelling games, this tends to be creating plots and for what's good for the story. In OSR games, it's more about using your competency and your knowledge to undertake actions that will help you out in situations, rather than simply relying on skill rolls. I don't think either of those is particularly bad. I just think they're different styles of gaming, and they scratch a different type of itch for the various gamers. I'm hoping to run some OSR soon, and I quite like the idea of a light rule system and players having to use their own sort of smarts to get themselves out of situations, within reason, because obviously character skills have to count for something. But I also enjoy the story games where it's more about creating dramatic tales. I'm not particularly bothered by death in RPGs. I think that it's an inevitable consequence of risk, in the same way as it is in real life. And I think that if you're in a situation where your character would sacrifice themselves or would undertake some risk with the knowledge that they're potentially going to be in serious trouble if it goes wrong, and then you take that risk and it does go wrong and you die, you can't really complain about it too much. As to whether it's a particularly male outlook, I don't really feel I can comment on that. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. So until I see you next time, take care and happy gaming.